laws need to be respected and enforced.
The Tories' Trump-inspired deportation force, 150,000 removals a year. Before we dive into this absolute political earthquake, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Because what I'm about to tell you is precisely the kind of story that Westminster doesn't want casually scrolling through your feed. Trust me, you'll want to be here for what comes next. Right, let's get straight to it. Badenoch has just unveiled what might be the most audacious, controversial, and frankly jaw-dropping immigration policy this country has seen in decades. We're talking about a brand new removals force that would deport up to 150,000 people from the United Kingdom every single year. 150,000. Let that number sink in for just a moment. To put this in perspective, last year we managed to remove fewer than 10,000 people. 9,800, to be precise. Badenoch is proposing to ramp that up by over 1,500%. This isn't policy evolution. This is policy revolution, and whether you think it's brilliant or terrifying probably depends entirely on which side of the political spectrum you call home. Now here's where it gets particularly spicy. The Conservatives aren't being coy about their inspiration here. They're explicitly modeling this new force on Donald Trump's Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, better known by its rather ominous acronym, ICE. Yes, that ICE, the same agency that's been simultaneously praised for its efficiency and condemned for its methods. The same agency that's become synonymous with midnight raids, family separations, and viral videos of people being dragged from their homes. That's a template the Tories are looking at, and they are being remarkably upfront about it. Badenoch apparently told the Telegraph she wouldn't be surprised if Trump himself loved this plan, which is either extraordinary political candor or extraordinarily tone-deaf messaging, depending on your view. But let's dig into the details, because this is where policy papers either stand up to scrutiny or collapse into political fantasy. The Conservatives have published a 20-page document outlining their vision, and it's called Securing Britain's Borders. It's part of what they are branding as a 7-point plan to end irregular migration. The proposed removals force would receive £1.6 billion in funding. That's not pocket change. That's serious money backing serious intent. And with that funding comes some genuinely alarming powers, at least if you're concerned about civil liberties. We're talking about the use of facial recognition technology without warning. No consent, no notification, just algorithmic identification in public spaces. The document promises that small boat arrivals will be removed within a week. Not processed within a week. Removed. Gone. Deported. Anyone arriving through unofficial routes would have their asylum claims automatically refused. Full stop, no exceptions. Now, before the comments section explodes, let's acknowledge the elephant in the room. Dame Priti Patel, who's been wheeled out to defend this policy at Conservative Party conference fringe events, insists that the British version would be very different from the American model. She's keen to stress that our laws are different, our structures are different, our parameters and boundaries are different. She says the two systems aren't comparable. Which is an interesting position to take when your party has just published a policy document explicitly stating the agency will be modeled on the recent successful approach of ICE. You can't simultaneously claim inspiration from something and then say it's completely incomparable when people start asking uncomfortable questions about that very thing. That's having your cake and eating it, and frankly, the British public deserves better than rhetorical gymnastics. So let's talk about ICE for a moment, because context matters. Trump's Immigration Customs Enforcement has been operational for over 2 decades now, and its track record is nothing if not contentious. Supporters argue it's effective at removing people who've entered the country illegally or overstayed visas. Critics point to documented cases of citizens being detained, families being separated, and what they characterize as heavy-handed tactics that bypass proper due process. There have been raids on workplaces, homes, even schools. There have been allegations of abuse in detention facilities. There have been lawsuits, investigations, and enough viral videos to fill a documentary series. This is the agency the Conservatives are looking at as a success story. Now, to be absolutely fair, Dame Priti has a point that British law would constrain what such a force could actually do. We have the Human Rights Act, we have judicial review, we have parliamentary oversight mechanisms that theoretically prevent the worst excesses. But here's the uncomfortable question. If those legal frameworks already exist, why do we need a brand new agency with sweeping powers and a £1.6 billion budget? What exactly isn't happening under the current system that requires this kind of institutional upheaval? Let's examine the mathematics of this proposal, because numbers don't lie even when politicians spin them. The Conservatives are targeting 150,000 removals annually. Currently, we're managing fewer than 10,000. That's a gap of roughly 140,000 people. Where are these additional deportees coming from? According to the policy, they'd primarily be individuals who had asylum claims rejected. Fair enough, you might think. If someone's claim has been properly assessed and found wanting, removal follows logically. But here's where implementation meets reality in a rather ugly collision. The UK asylum system is currently processing applications at a glacial pace. There's a backlog of tens of thousands of cases. Even if we dramatically speed up processing, the infrastructure simply doesn't exist to suddenly identify, locate, detain, and remove 150,000 people annually. We're talking about a logistical operation on a scale this country hasn't attempted since, well, possibly ever. You'd need detention facilities. You'd need transportation arrangements. You'd need cooperation from receiving countries. You'd need legal teams to handle appeals. You'd need administrative staff to manage the bureaucracy. And all of this would need to happen whilst maintaining at least a veneer of due process and human rights compliance. The pledge to remove small boat arrivals within a week is particularly ambitious, bordering on fantastical. Think about what that actually means in practice. Someone arrives on a beach in Kent on Monday. By the following Monday, they're supposed to be on a plane back to wherever they came from. That assumes you can immediately establish their nationality, which isn't always straightforward when people arrive without documents. It assumes the country of origin will accept them back, which isn't guaranteed. It assumes there are no legal challenges, which is optimistic given that asylum law specifically exists to protect people from being returned to danger. It assumes you have a detention capacity to hold people whilst arrangements are made. It assumes you have the flights available. It assumes quite a lot, frankly, and assumptions tend to crumble when they meet the messy reality of international law and human bureaucracy. The facial recognition element deserves particular attention because it represents a significant escalation in state surveillance capabilities. The proposal explicitly mentions using this technology without warning. What does that mean in practice? Does it mean cameras in public spaces constantly scanning crowds? Does it mean law enforcement can point a device at you on the street and instantly check your immigration status? Does it mean your face becomes data in a system you never consented to join? These aren't hypothetical concerns. Facial recognition technology has well-documented problems with accuracy, particularly with people of color. It raises profound questions about privacy, consent, and the relationship between citizen and state. And the fact that it's being proposed without warning, without the need for reasonable suspicion or probable cause, should concern anyone who values civil liberties regardless of their views on immigration. Let's address the politics of this, because policy never exists in a vacuum. Badenoch is pitching this as part of her leadership identity. She's positioning herself as a tough-on-immigration candidate, the one willing to say what others won't, the one with the courage to propose radical solutions to what her party frames as a national crisis. It's classic right-wing populism, and it's precisely the kind of red meat that gets conservative members excited. But it's also transparently a reaction to Reform UK breathing down the Tories' necks on immigration. Nigel Farage has made this his signature issue, and the Conservative Party is terrified of bleeding voters to reform in constituencies they can't afford to lose. So we get policies that sound tough, that generate headlines, that make it look like the Tories have answers. Whether those policies are actually implementable is almost secondary to the political theatre they create. The comparison to Trump is particularly revealing about where British conservatism currently sits. There was a time, not so long ago, when British conservatives would have been mortified to be associated with Trump-style politics. The party of Churchill, of Thatcher, of Cameron compassionate conservatism wouldn't have dreamed of explicitly modeling policy on someone considered by many to be authoritarian and divisive. But that Tory party is dead, or at least dormant. The modern Conservative Party, the one Badenoch leads, is apparently quite comfortable with the comparison. Badenoch isn't running away from the Trump connection. She's leaning into it. She's suggesting Trump would love her plan, as though that's a selling point rather than a warning sign. That tells you everything about the rightward lurch British conservatism has taken. But here's what really matters. Could this actually work? Not the politics of it, but the practical reality. And the answer, if we're being honest, is almost certainly no. Not without fundamentally rewriting international law, not without violating human rights conventions we're signatories to, not without cooperation from other countries who might not fancy becoming Britain's dumping ground for unwanted migrants, and not without spending far more than £1.6 billion. The infrastructure doesn't exist. The legal framework would need wholesale changes. The diplomatic relationships required would take years to establish. And all of this assumes a level of administrative competence that frankly hasn't been the hallmark of recent British governments. We can't run a functioning train service. We can't process passport applications without months-long delays. We can't manage our borders without Dover turning into a car park every summer. But sure, we're going to identify, process, and deport 150,000 people annually. Pull the other one. What we're really looking at here is political positioning masquerading as serious policy. It's a document designed to win leadership contests and generate favorable headlines in sympathetic newspapers. It's red meat for a base that wants to believe there are simple solutions to complex problems. It's a political equivalent of promising everyone a pony. Sounds lovely, completely unworkable, but gets applause at the rally. The tragedy is that immigration is a genuinely important issue that deserves serious policy responses, not headline-chasing stunts that fall apart under the slightest scrutiny. So where does this leave us? The conservatives have proposed an American-style deportation force that they simultaneously claim is and isn't like the American model. They promise to remove 15 times more people than we currently manage with £1.6 billion and some facial recognition cameras. They've pledged to process and remove asylum seekers within a week despite the legal and logistical impossibilities. And they've wrapped it all in rhetoric about securing Britain's borders whilst positioning themselves firmly in Trump's political tradition. It's bold, it's controversial, and it's almost certainly undeliverable. But it's also politically calculated to appeal to a particular constituency within conservative ranks and the broader electorate who believe immigration is out of control and want politicians who promise simple, tough solutions. The real question isn't whether this policy will ever be implemented, because it almost certainly won't in anything resembling its current form. The real question is what it tells us about British politics in 2025. It tells us that mainstream parties are willing to adopt increasingly extreme positions on immigration. It tells us that comparisons to Trump are no longer politically toxic. It tells us that policy detail matters less than performative toughness. And it tells us that we're in for a bruising, divisive, and probably quite ugly debate about immigration in the run-up to whenever the next general election happens. Right, that's the story. 150,000 deportations, Trump-style tactics, and Conservative Party politics at its most calculated. If you found this valuable, if you want to stay ahead of the Westminster Circus, hit that subscribe button now. Because stories like this are exactly what UK Connors is here for. The politics they don't want you examining too closely, delivered without the spin. I'll see you in the next one. And trust me, with British politics in its current state, there will be plenty more